Well, hello, Big L podcast listeners. Now you get to see me in the flesh, in Technicolor, and in my studio for my YouTube channel, which is Pink Flame of Liberty. So I hope you enjoy this little patron only, at least for the time being. I hate to keep things under wraps, but this will be your bonus, probably for 6 months or so, that I promised on the last few episodes. And what we are going to cover, if you have not listened to the podcast dealing with the taxation is theft issue, this is a bonus to that episode. This will not make sense to you unless you have listened to that episode. The information I'm giving you here was not included in that episode because this is new to me. Every time, I think that I've stared at these platforms more than any sane person, any sane person should do. Each time I look at them, I see something else. Something else jumps at me because my focus might be somewhere else. And when I was doing the episodes on the platform history and what happened in 2006 and in 2004, I was reading out some language for that podcast and boom, it jumped out at me. And I was like, holy shit, this is an important piece. Maybe one of the most important pieces. Some people will refuse to be convinced. Okay, nothing you can do about that. This is a cumulative case, and it gets to be a point where, come on, piece after piece after piece after piece. And this is a big piece. To summarize, so you know where I'm going, in that episode, I made the claim and proved the claim that there are things in our current platform which are clearly transitional. They were never intended to be all we were looking for. Specifically, the one that causes people a lot of problems is the one that says we call for the repeal of the income tax. New party members who don't know about the party history, and some older party members who would like to pretend that something changed mid-party history or just want to ignore reality, act like we went from a position of abolish all taxation to just abolish income tax. False, false, false. Income tax is singled out, and I had already proved it, but I've got another piece of proof here. It was singled out as the near horizon doable thing on the road to the abolition of all taxation. My claim was that is a transitional item. Okay, I think I proved it there, but here's the, put a fork in it, it's done. If we look at the 2004 platform, which if you remember is when they broke out the 2002 platform without much rewriting and shoehorned it into certain categories, and the intent was to clean it up later, but to at least reorganize it into these categories. That turned out to be a tragic mistake, which I went over in that podcast. So it divided the planks. You had one plank at one time that was pretty much pure principle, and they divided it into the issue, the principle, and I am looking at the 2004 platform in front of me at LPedia, link in the low bar. The issue, the principle, solutions, and transitional action. So, if we go to the plank which talks about taxation, which is entitled The Economy, they took the current plank and broke it up. So, the issue, government intervention in the economy imperils both the personal freedom and material prosperity of every American. Okay, that's a new thing they wrote to have something for issue, because I don't remember that in there before. The free market, which respects individual rights in voluntary trade with other individuals, should be allowed to function unhindered by government. The only proper role of government in the economic realm is to protect property rights, adjudicate disputes, and provide a legal framework in which voluntary trade is protected. Okay, that's the old language. Solution. To ensure the economic freedom and enhance the economic well-being of Americans, we would implement the following policies. And I want to make a note here. I'm going to be reading two separate planks, both the economy and taxation, because it was so redundant, but this is the important one. These are the policies they would implement. Dramatic reductions in taxes and spending, an end to deficit budgets, a halt to inflationary monetary policies, the elimination of all government impediments to free trade, the repeal of all controls on wages, prices, rents, profits, production, and interest rates. Most modern libertarians would rather pee their pants than take that consistent libertarian position. But here we go. Transitional action means the party itself, its own interpreter, called this transitional. We call for the repeal of the income tax, the abolishment of the Internal Revenue Service, and all federal programs and services not required under the U.S. Constitution. I am going to do an analysis of the current platform, not as it exists now, but probably when it was pretty stable, 2010. Probably use that one. And I'm going to compare it to this 2004 platform because I'm interested on how many items were pulled out of transitional while other items were pulled out of principle. I think that will reveal a bias and a plan, because I do think the plan was to kind of hide the ball on the taxation thing. So I'll have more data points on that. That'll probably be another bonus episode. How does that sound to you guys? So right here, the party itself says it's a transitional action. That should be the end of that. Now, some people say, but it still didn't mention the repeal of all taxation. It did in a separate plank called taxation. And solutions, number D or letter D is support the repeal of all taxation. Again, that's a long-term goal. The transitions there are, as an interim measure, all criminal and civil sanctions against tax evasion should be terminated immediately. In the current fiscal crisis of states and municipalities, default is preferable to raising taxes or perpetual refinancing of growing public debt. That had been a controversial statement. It is not in the current platform. It should be. There was a fight over whether or not the debt should be repudiated in the 70s. Rothbard advocated repudiation. Some members felt that violated the statement of principles. It's the only time that a platform plank was appealed to the Judicial Committee. I think the year was 76, thereabouts. And the plank was overturned as in conflict with the statement of principles. I do not agree with the Judicial Committee. Their holding was that the people who are, with whom the United States government borrowed money have a contractual relationship with the United States government, and we honor contracts. I think that is well-intentioned and ill-advised. We honor legitimate contracts. The United States cannot legitimately bind future generations and the current generation who doesn't consent to debt. The other party should be buyer beware. Just because the other party entered into it, it is an invalid contract and unenforceable. That is my view. And it seems like by 2004, the story flipped. So despite the fact that the Judicial Committee overruled it in the 70s, I don't know what happened between then and now, or whether they just stuck it back in there and pretended like the Judicial Committee never ruled on it. So there we go. That is the nail in the coffin of that. Put a fork in it. She's done. She's done. Anywho, the other thing I wanted to share with you that I found, there are some things that we think should be so obvious that they don't need to be stated. For instance, it should be obvious that we are against the FEC. Past platforms spelled it out. They also spelled out, as you know, every single possible agency in the world which made the platform unwieldy. The argument was made when the platform was shortened that it's not necessary to spell it all out. It is obvious from the principles. I agree. Yet, trying to think of what year this happened, maybe 2014-ish, the year's not important. An LNC member, Joshua Katz, love Joshua, he was just way off base here, actually asked this question: are we really against the FEC? The platform doesn't say so. And that is why I favor a more detailed platform. Because the minute you have an LNC member questioning whether or not we were against the FEC because those 3 letters were not put in the platform, boggles the mind. And people warned that kind of thing would happen. And it has. I don't really know the solution, because I don't think the solution is going back to a platform that is completely unable to be amended at convention. It's just too much. So this is the background. This was kind of an introduction. So another thing which should be obvious is that the Libertarian Party is a propertarian party. What that means is rights are centered on private property. All rights are property rights. Not all libertarian traditions agree with that. There are anti-propertarian libertarians. They are usually of the European tradition. But the American Libertarian Party, it should be, you shouldn't even have to say it, is a propertarian party. When things are left unsaid and people lose track of their history and silver-tongued devils can come amongst the flock, using preacher language, and say, where does it say that? Where does it say that? Where does it not say that? Where doesn't it say that? The whole idea of the LP and all of the planks unravel without that. It is the assumed foundation that didn't need to be stated. It was obvious. It was self-evident. But you have pedants who come along, well, where does it say that? Where does it say that socialism is incompatible with the Libertarian Party? Yep, people make that argument. And when we say socialism, I want to tell you what I'm not talking about. That word is used sometimes, and the meaning meant is voluntary communitarianism, meaning while you can own private property, you choose not to with a group of other people who choose not to, and you live a voluntary socialist society. That's not what I mean when I say socialism. That is voluntary communitarianism, and people should not confuse the two. Socialism has a moral and ethical foundation to it, just like propertarianism does. I don't agree with it, but it is self-consistent, and it has certain beliefs about private property and bosses and wages and the labor theory of value and all of that. It is fundamentally and utterly incompatible with LP beliefs. So just wanted to clear that up, that when I talk about socialism, I'm talking about the ones that makes truth claims about private property, not the ones where you got a bunch of people who voluntarily decide to live in a completely sharing economy. Nothing wrong with that. Why there's nothing wrong with that is because you're not saying they didn't have the right to have private property. They had it, and they laid it aside. Similarly, I have an absolute right to self-defense, yet I'm a pacifist. I choose not to exercise it, but I can. I could tomorrow change my mind and nothing will have changed. You're allowed to voluntarily give up rights that you have for whatever reason. If you're curious, why am I a pacifist? It's for religious reasons. I believe in the sacredness of life. That's just me. No judgment on anyone else. I'm not claiming anyone who hasn't reached that conclusion doesn't love life, blah, blah, blah. That's just me. So, also in this 2004 platform, though, and this is how you'll see, it's just assumed that we're propertarian. But little glimpses come out. Of course, the statement of principle says we oppose all government interference with private property. What the modern socialists do is claim what was really meant there as personal property. Like they'll joke with you, mock at you kind of, we're not here to take your toothbrush. Like you're allowed to have a toothbrush. You're not allowed to have a toothbrush factory.
Get the new Ipana with the brand new flavor. It's daddy for your teeth.
Okay, but okay, they argue against that. You'd think that should be clear, right? Now, of course, there's a right to property plank. That already puts, that already seals it. But I want to show where the places where it's just stated, like just assumed. There's no defense of it because it doesn't need to be defended. So let me find it. Okay. We talked about this in the podcast, and I think I made a little snarky remark there too, but I wanted to make it clear here. In the plank entitled Unowned Resources, it says, we specifically hail, that's so weird, all hail the king. We specifically hail the U.S. refusal to accept the proposed Law of the Sea Treaty because the treaty excluded private property principles. It's just assumed. And that cannot mean personal property because there ain't no damn toothbrushes floating around in the ocean. This is talking about having a homesteading right in the ocean. So again, another piece of the puzzle. You have to have a full-orbed view of party ideological history. So I hope you have enjoyed this little tidbit. If you like this kind of granular getting into the history, you will love my YouTube channel. I have just started there on that channel. The first episode might not be up yet because I'm filming them at the same time. If you go, you'll see I'm wearing all the same clothes. We are going to start with newsletter number 1 from the LP News and work our way through every single one of them, all 300 and something up through the present. And we're going to go through them and get a feel for what was happening at that period of time. We'll talk about the controversies. We'll talk about what's going on in the world. We'll talk about the candidates. And in reliving like the newspapers of the party throughout that time, I think we will learn a great deal of history and we will learn it in context. So if that intrigues you, please do subscribe to the Pink Flame of Liberty on YouTube. And remember, at least for a limited time, this might not be available forever. All patrons, which would be you guys, at least until this is released, of the Big L podcast are also considered to be patrons at the same level over at Pink Flame of Liberty. I'll probably need to manually add you, get in touch with me at pinkflameofliberty@gmail.com. So there's bonus episodes there too of historical items. All right, I hope you guys have an awesome day. And you know what I need to say, but I need to get some caffeine in it. Go forth and be free, mi guapas de libertad.